What is your name and age?
My name is William Stinson. I'm 77 years old.
Do you have any personal knowledge of the Cold War?
Yes, I do. My first recollection of the Cold War was at its beginning, which was around the end of World War II in 1945. And at that time, I would have been 6 or 7 years old.
How do you define the Cold War?
Well, the Cold War arose out of a political difference between Russia and the United States. And these were two countries who emerged as the two strongest world powers left at the end of World War II. The defeat of Germany and Japan by the Allies in 1945 involved the division of the German nation. Each country in the Allied force, each major country, which was England, France, United States, and Russia, divided up the German land area, and also divided up land area of Berlin. In doing so, Germany got a section, a fourth, I guess, of the land of Berlin, and consequently the fourth of the land area of Germany. When Berlin was divided up and a part of it was occupied by Russia, the Russians apparently decided to starve out the German people, who had no food and no prospects of getting any food in, and the United States tried to supply the German people, or the people in Berlin at least, with food. And the first big confrontation that came along about that time was the Russians decided to blockade any food or materials, resources coming into Berlin, and the United States insisted that the Germans had to be fed, and that brought the airlift of food and materials by the U.S. into Berlin over the Russians' objections. So that was kind of the start up of the Cold War. It never developed into a hot war. It never developed into a shooting match directly involving the U.S. against Russia, but it came very, very close at times, starting with that 1945 encounter in Berlin in the air blockade, and continuing on at places like Cuba and Korea and Vietnam, and Russia itself, when Russia shot down an American spy plane in the 1960s.
Why was it called a Cold War?
Well, it never really developed. It came so very, very close to a shooting war, but it never developed past the stage of diplomatic maneuvering, one side trying to get over on the other, and there was never any shots fired directly between the two countries, so that made it kind of a diplomatic war instead of a military armed conflict.
How did you participate in the Cold War?
Well, and as time went by, I became of draft age, and at that time, the United States maintained their military by drafting young men. And so when I became draft age, or shortly before that, I became a member of the reserve unit, Tennessee Army National Guard. And during that time, I had an obligation to serve, which I believe might have been 10 years, 8 years, 10 years, something like that. And during that time, the Cold War was going good. I became 18 in late 1956, and so from that time, about the time I got into the Army National Guard until I had served out my obligation, I was an active member of the Guard.
Okay, were you expecting a war while you served in the Guard?
Yes, tensions got very, very high at certain times. I remember even before I got in the National Guard, a war broke out in Korea in about 1950 when I was much younger than draft age. But in this short, fairly short war in Korea developed over North Korean military units invading South Korea across a parallel line that had been established at the end of World War II during the truce of World War II, and they called it the 38th parallel, and North Korean troops invaded South Korea. American troops retaliated by taking armed action against North Korea, which was a puppet communist or Russian government. So that war lasted a few years, and it never left Korea, but there was U.S. troops and no doubt Russian military people involved in that. And then after that, there was a Cuban Missile Crisis. No, before that, there was a spy plane in 1960. The United States was spying on Russia by flying high altitude aerial reconnaissance flights, and Russia found out about these flights and shot down the spy plane, spy plane, captured the pilot, held him as a prisoner, and this became a very, very tense situation between the two countries trying to get the pilot released and not executed, and he was ultimately released. But during that time, it became clear to both sides, of course, to the world, that the United States was spying on the land area of Russia, flying aerial flights over Russia, taking pictures, and the shooting down of this airplane proved that point to the satisfaction of the Russians, and the Russians told the world about it. Then a couple of years later, in 1961, Russia, which had successfully gained information on how to build an atomic bomb, brought missiles to the island of Cuba, which was another communist puppet government, and placed missiles on Cuba with the presumed purpose of firing missiles at the land area of the United States. The United States found out about it, had a big showdown with them, ordered the missiles removed, and at that time I was in the Army Guard, serving in the Army Guard, and at that time this was the highest time of mobilization I'm aware of in my memory, where we were so close to going to war against Russia that we had military units in the streets, fully loaded, prepared to go with a phone call, and there were Guard units called up to active duty, and it was the highest alert of military readiness that I'm aware of in my whole life.
So, when this was going on, where you were stationed, when you heard about the government that was going through and that there might be a war breaking out, you and your troops were ordered to pack up, arm yourselves, and you were waiting in the streets for the
Well,
go?
Well, the regular Army units were, and the reserve units were placed in a higher state of readiness. I was never mobilized to the point where I was expected to leave the country in a military situation, but I was placed in a higher state of readiness to relieve the active duty troops who were expected to invade Cuba.
How do they train you or prepare you to, if anything happened, to fight in combat against Russians?
Well, the propaganda about Russian soldiers was I happened to be trained in tank warfare or armor, and the propaganda about Russian soldiers was that, of course, that they were very capable and well trained and committed military people, and that in our specialty in the armor training, I remember being told that tank warfare would consist of usually 3 exchanges. The first exchange, whoever shot first, the Russian tank or the American tank, would get that shot, and the second shot would be a return fire from the other side, the Russian, and the third shot, whoever got that shot off first, would because of our training and their training, would be the killing shot, and that in a tank battle, you would usually get 1 shot only, and if you didn't kill the other tank with the second shot, they would kill you.
Um, when did you end your service in the Guard?
I was discharged in 1966, and at that time I was 27 years old, almost 28.
How long after you were discharged did the Cold War last?
Well, it continued on at a less intensity all the way up to the tearing down of the Berlin Wall and the disassembly of the Russia and the USSR and the Russian satellite countries, and that was all the way up to 1990 or so. And at that time, it just kind of went away on its own. The economics of being fully battle ready, a country as big as Russia and a country as big as the U.S. just kind of took its toll on both sides, and they kind of just reached a truce with each other, and the Cold War went away.
Well, thank you for letting me interview you, and that'll be all.